Hi, I'm Sebastian James Hawkins. As we speak, today is the 31st of October 2019, and in just a few hours' time, the United Kingdom was supposed to be leaving the European Union. As you may be aware by now, that's been delayed until the end of January 2020, and the United Kingdom will be holding a general election mid-December. Today, in this video, we're not going to be looking at the pros and cons of leaving or remaining in the European Union. We want to be looking at some of the things that have been going on over the last 3.5 years and what you can learn from this for your own business negotiations. If you wish to download the text to this video, you can do so online, either in German or in English. So let's start right away with our first point. The referendum held in June 2016 was one where a simple majority would swing it, i.e. win. That means that one vote more for one side would defeat the other side. In the end, 52% or roughly 52% of the country voted to leave the EU, 48% voted to remain. That's a very, very mixed opinion in the whole country, so therefore a result which is either black or white might in fact be difficult to accept. Decision-making criteria actually help us when we find it difficult to find a negotiation agreement, but it's what criteria do we take and how do we define this criteria which needs to be negotiated beforehand. If both parties agree upon the criteria, as the government at the time in Great Britain or the United Kingdom did, then the result generally is accepted. When you're buying a house, you may look at various criteria, i.e. the location, the facilities in the town or village, the distance to work, obviously the house price, the size, etc. And the same is in your own negotiations. You can look at facts, data, prices, contract, other alternative prices, previous negotiation agreements, changes in various market forces, inflation rates, exchange rates, and perhaps even decisions made by others, such as the boss, a judge, or being helped along in your negotiation by a mediator. So decision-making criteria are one way to help you reach a negotiation agreement. Important is though to get that criteria right. The Brexit referendum decision divided a nation. It also divided Parliament. The negotiations with the European Union were held mainly by Theresa May and her government, afterwards then Boris Johnson. But it was just the government that held these negotiations. No other parties were involved in the process. The public weren't involved. There was very little information about what was going on. And therefore it's very difficult for actually to get other people on your side if they're not involved in some kind of decision-making process. In the past, negotiations that have led to a good result where people accept the result is where they've been able to influence the negotiation process, but also the decision made at the end. And this wasn't the case for a majority of the time during these Brexit negotiations. It was in fact just a few months before her premiership ended that Theresa May offered to start discussing with members or leaders of other political parties in the United Kingdom Parliament about ideas that they might think about generating for breaking the deadlock. What do we learn from this? Be transparent with information, communicate, and also involve other stakeholders in the process so that they are more willing to go along with the decision made at the end. From the beginning of the negotiations with the European Union, the EU has been represented by their chief negotiator, Michel Barnier. The United Kingdom have been represented by 2 or 3 various Brexit ministers, as well as Theresa May taking over at some point the negotiations. The 27 further countries in the European Union also aligned together and spoke with one voice. The British, however, may have been perceived as having some infighting within their parties and not being quite sure about what they want. This can lead to some dissatisfaction, of course, on behalf of the other parties negotiating with you. So when you're negotiating as a team, make sure that you know your roles, that you know you have your targets set, that you know what your arguments are, and that you speak as one. We know that if both parties stick to their original positions in a negotiation, that can lead to no result, a bad result, and also a worsening of the relationship. Theresa May brought virtually the same deal, if not the same deal, to Parliament 3 times to be voted on earlier this year, and it was rejected also 3 times. Other parties weren't involved in the process, and she stuck to her position. This led to an impasse and in the end led to her resigning from her post as Prime Minister of the country. So it's important in negotiations, yes, to have a position, but also to look at the interest behind that and also to discuss with the other party how we can reach those interests. My interest, but also yours as well. You may not reach 100% all of the time, but you will reach a good deal of your interest or be able to fulfill these if the other party is able to fulfill theirs as well. Do or die. I think these are the words that Boris Johnson used when he came to power just about 3 months ago. And die isn't a very nice alternative, in fact. And it's important that when you're negotiating that you develop a good alternative to the negotiation you're actually working on right now. A strong alternative allows you to say no. And finding out about the alternatives of the other party, in fact, also strengthens your position too. Living and working in Germany, I get asked every day about Brexit right now, and I can understand that it's really difficult for people to appreciate or understand what's going on actually in the United Kingdom at this moment in time. It's important to take a step back and view the so-called big picture. So this could be, in the Brexit case, looking at the history of the British Isles and the relationship of the United Kingdom with the European Union, looking at the reasons behind a border or no border in between Northern Ireland and Southern Ireland, looking at the Good Friday Agreement from 1998, and basically trying to take get a good overview of the whole system, of the whole picture. In your own negotiations, this means taking a step back for a moment, whether in a timeout or a mental step back, and thinking about the relationship, how you feel about the other party, maybe what other people or parties could be involved or need to be involved in the negotiation, and perhaps what other options you might want to bring in to help to get to a better deal. Theresa May and her government tried for around about 3 years to reach a deal with the European Union, and the European Union side was unanimous behind the decision. Unfortunately, the British Parliament rejected it 3 times. It led to Theresa May stepping down as Prime Minister and then to an election between 2 candidates to become Prime Minister, of which then Boris Johnson then won. Changing the player can give some impetus into your negotiation. It can actually help create a new dynamic behind the whole thing. I think that's what Boris Johnson actually achieved by it, and in fact managed to reach a deal with the European Union, a change deal with the European Union. However, British Parliament didn't accept this either. Changing the players can help in your negotiation, particularly if certain participants don't get on with each other. So it can be a strategically good decision to in fact think about who could negotiate better than myself in this situation. If you aim slightly higher, you often get more out of the deal. Doesn't always work, obviously, if you aim too high and get kicked out in the process. But when Boris Johnson came to power, he actually set himself a very optimistic target of reaching an agreement with the EU, where no one had been able to do this in the three and a quarter years previously. However, he took a lot of his party and a lot of the country with him along this journey, and in fact did manage to get some kind of result, at least with the European Union in the end. So, in your negotiations, think about your minimum, your maximum, and realistic targets, but set these often slightly higher, so in fact you do fight more for them in your negotiations. The reason we had a referendum in 2016 was a way for David Cameron, then Prime Minister, to appease a certain part of his own Conservative Party at the time, who were anti-European Union. In fact, there's been a lot of infighting in the Conservative Party over the past decades regarding their stance towards the EU. In your own negotiation, it's important that your party, however, speaks as one voice. It's not important that everybody in your parties involved in the negotiation. You have various roles, perhaps people who are advising you on technical aspects, and that you have a coordinator maybe in the background, and that you as a negotiation leader are the main front person in the negotiation. So make sure that your goals have been defined, that your arguments have been put together and rehearsed, and that you speak as one voice in your talks. One of the largest, if not the largest, sticking point of the Brexit negotiations between the United Kingdom and the European Union has been, of course, the Northern-Southern Irish border. And this has been a green border since 1998, where people have been free to cross it, some doing that several times a day on their way to work. And obviously, with the Northern Ireland being part of the United Kingdom and potentially leaving the EU, you have a problem, because one side of that border is a member of the European Union, Ireland, and one side isn't, i.e. Northern Ireland. So you need a creative solution. I remember Boris Johnson talking about this and saying, well, we have lots of ideas going on right now. And the reporter asking him, well, what ideas do we have? And he said, well, there are lots of things we're thinking about. What exactly are we thinking about? Oh, lots of things. I don't think there were or at the time many solutions that had been managed to be developed. However, it's important to take our time in negotiation to develop creative solutions, and a solution isn't always apparent right now. We need to discuss these. We need to sit down together using various creativity techniques. This might be, for example, achieving better processes in your company so that you can, or at the supplier, so that you can change the cost structure, therefore achieving a price decrease at the same time. So you might need input from various parties and a decent creative process to achieve solutions to achieve your goal. You may have noticed this yourselves in families, etc., that when you're having an argument and then you may in fact not talk to each other for a while, but sitting down afterwards and discussing things actually helps reach an agreement rather than avoiding each other all of the time. And this is something that during the Brexit negotiations perhaps wasn't done enough, i.e. negotiating, actually dialogue, and dialogue internally as well as externally. So not just the United Kingdom with the European Union, but also within the United Kingdom as well. A lot of people wanted to voice their opinions, and these were either ignored or perhaps not taken seriously enough, or they weren't involved in the top discussions. So it's important that, I think, to realize that you're going to reach a better agreement if you do sit down, and despite it being a difficult process, despite perhaps you not liking the other party, despite you being in strong disagreement with each other, that actually a dialogue is probably the better solution than either just avoiding each other or fighting over things. Don't threaten, but talk about the consequences of not reaching a deal. A lot of members of parliament in the United Kingdom, I think, felt threatened by some of the rhetoric. For example, if we don't reach a deal, then we're going to crash out of Europe on the 31st of October 2019. And therefore, they came together to actually bring in laws and stipulations that made the government see sense and therefore delay a possible Brexit until the 31st of January 2020, and also to avoid actually the country leaving the European Union without a deal, i.e. crashing out with all the consequences. So in your own negotiations, it's also important to be more aware about what are the consequences for my party if I don't reach a deal, but discuss the consequences for the other party as well. If they don't reach a deal today, what will these be? Will they be happy living with those consequences, or should we continue with the dialogue and try and reach an agreement today? Over the past few days and weeks, we've seen leaders and members of opposition parties in the United Kingdom government working together and discussing and developing solutions for defeating the government on certain propositions. For example, making sure that the United Kingdom does not leave the European Union or crash out without a deal on the 31st of October this year. And these parties aren't in agreement on every single subject and don't always share the same values, but they are in agreement on one thing. And so through coming together, they are in fact able to make a force or create a force that can stand up against a government. Coalitions can help you when dealing with a very strong partner or a monopolist, for example, so working together with other institutions, other departments, other companies, in order to increase and improve your negotiation position. I think one of the most important aspects in negotiation is that we must be prepared to walk away from the negotiation table if the deal on that table isn't good for us and if perhaps we do have a better alternative. In the case of Brexit, it was very important that the government actually not reveal necessarily that we need a deal necessarily, but that we would be prepared to walk away. I think the only problem was that they weren't quite sure what the alternative solution would be. Yes, a no deal means crashing out of Europe, but with all the consequences that that in fact may bring. So important is that you are able to walk away, but that your alternative has to be a strong one as well. I remember even a couple of years ago that the British public and a lot of journalists wanting the government negotiating with the European Union to reveal more about their intentions and about their plans, and the government saying, well, look, if we reveal too much information, then it will in fact weaken our position. There is in fact a lot to be said for being careful about what information you provide the other side, and also the speed in perhaps you provide the other side with information. Maybe you want to do it in slices, so bit by bit, but also make sure that the other side reciprocates this and gives you just as much information in return. Revealing too much about your alternatives, about the fact you don't have an alternative, for example, will indeed weaken your position. So be very, very careful when revealing plans to the public and obviously to the other party as well. So as you can see, there's a lot we can actually take and learn from political and real life negotiations from around the world. We've taken just 15 points from the last 3.5 years of Brexit talks and negotiations, and we hope that some of these can be of use for you in your own business environment. If you wish to receive any further infos and tips, feel free to subscribe to our channel or to have a look at any of the seminars that we offer on the topic of negotiation. Thanks a lot.